back. And he's taught me to kind of go back and not necessarily take anybody at their word, but look at the facts. When I look back at the history of the last 100 years, I certainly see the spending of Wilson and Roosevelt and Hoover. Then I saw 7 administrations, 35 years of falling deficits. And then our hero, Ronald Reagan, came in. And we saw the deficits start to climb amazingly. We saw the spending start to climb amazingly. We saw Bush 1 continue it. A little bit of fall under Clinton. Big increases under Bush 2. Well, why is Roosevelt bad? Why is our Reagan such a hero to us? That's my question. My real question then is, will there ever be another Harding that literally cuts the government in half? Will my kids and grandkids ever have a reasonable chance of living reasonable kinds of lives that we do with these unfunded liabilities and these deficits? Is there truly any chance that our government's going to get some common sense and quit the deficit spending?
You've got to be optimistic. You've got to be optimistic. Why are we here? Right? We're here to try to make things better. And that's why I'm writing my books and speaking. And I think that it is possible to change. And in fact, what a terrible thing if we went home and smoothed our kids down and said it's hopeless. I don't think it's hopeless. I think actually, as I mentioned before, there's people here, and there's this grassroots movement. There's these polls that say people are kind of sick of what government is doing. It's very unusual. I haven't seen it before. I've been in the business for quite a while. So I'm optimistic, and that's why I'm out talking. But you can't also be Pollyannish and say it's going to fix itself. Some people say, don't worry, John. Don't worry. It'll be okay. We've had this before. It's going to fix itself. I don't think it'll fix itself.
I haven't heard any solutions. I'm an optimist guy. I'd like to hear some solutions from somebody that gives me things that hold them out.
Well, the solution is for the entitlement. I gave you my solutions. You stop the big stimulus programs. You get the Fed back to the business that was working before. We had a debt-to-GDP ratio that was 40% under Ronald Reagan. It was 40% under George W. Bush. We now have it going up to 100% and beyond. So those are the facts, and I'd say that let's get it back to 40%. And how do you get it back to 40%? You stop all the spending, deficit spending. So arithmetically, it is not a problem. You also asked about FDR and Reagan. I'm quite sure I understand the point. But
what we know is we recognize that our deficit fell in the administration's 35 years until it hit Reagan, and then Reagan started the deficit back up again.
It's exactly right. The debt-to-GDP ratio was over 100%. Then came back down because the deficit was smaller. And in the 80s, it went up, and it started coming down, but not to 100%, not to 200%, to 40%. And then it started coming back down again, and then it got to be around 40%. So I think, look, if we got the debt, if you think Reagan's debt was bad, it was 40% of GDP, I would be so happy right now. I would be so happy right now if that GDP ratio was 40%. It's not even close. So,
Professor, we're going to take one more question. I'm disappointed that we go back here, but Dr. Diamond has a question for you.
I'd like to get back to your first point about cheap money. I too knew Alan Greenspan back in the old Ayn Rand days. As a matter of fact, he and I took economics classes together, and I can't think of the name of the professor. But you talked about disagreeing with him, and I'm curious to hear from you what his position was in disagreement with you, because you made a lot of sense to me when you were talking.
okay. So the question is, what does Alan Greenspan think about the beginning of the crisis and the housing boom and bubble? He argues that there was, at that time, a global savings glut, if you like, too much saving around the world. and that drove down interest rates. So he would say that the interest rate he was setting really didn't affect mortgage interest rates very much because they were being driven down by other forces. It's kind of an argument. There's other forces globally that were bringing interest rates down too low in that time and forcing this housing boom and the excessive risk-taking. So when I look at the numbers, I don't see that. So I don't see this low savings. It seems to me that if it was not a savings, but it seems to me it was just like it was in the 70s and 80s and 90s. You don't see that particular change. So that's the kind of discussion, and it's like at this point, kind of two economists who are good friends going back and forth with each other. He was the chairman of the Fed at the time, and I sort of have to think about that. I would say, maybe just more generally, and I have served in government, so I know what it's like. It is very hard for government officials to examine. It's hard for anyone. It's hard for anyone to go back and reconsider objectively what happened. And so I think that's just the way it is. That's why I think some of the things that we're talking about here tonight, the difficult problems to fix, probably do require changes of people. Probably do. There'll have to be some turnover, some changes in governments with sort of a different philosophy about things. I think that will make a difference because some of the people who are in charge now were in charge during this period where things got worse. So that's the nature of a democracy. We can make these changes, but also have these, I think, fascinating exchanges about the economics. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very erudite presentation, and it was great. I'd like to present you a certificate of appreciation to John B. Taylor, distinguished guest speaker and dedicated service to the principles of American liberty. Okay, don't forget next month is the second Tuesday, the 13th, instead of the 6th, and we'll be having a report back from San Jose, from Pete Constant, and a report from Israel, from Mary Green, so it should be interesting. Have a great month. Peace be with you.